Welcome to episode 8 of the third season of the Simply Verified Beef podcast. The title of this episode is Trusted Calves, and we're going to be talking about how to market your calves as we're in the swing of the fall run. Our guests for this episode are Jason Danard, managing partner of the Electronic Auction Mart, or TEAM, and Ken Schaus, a VBP Plus certified feedlot producer from Ontario. We'll be covering the do's and don'ts when listing cattle for sale and how to get the best sale results. We'll start off by asking both of you to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and what you do. And we'll start with Ken.
Good. Well, thanks, Emma. My name is Ken Schaus, and I'm one of the managing partners of Schaus Land and Cattle. We're a family business located in southern Bruce County. And my father started the business in 1971, and I joined him in 1984, and we worked together every day. Back then, what he did was brought a lot of calves in out of Western Canada, and we're still doing that to this day. When I was a little kid, I remember unloading rail cars locally here. So, not to date myself, but I've been around the cattle business a fair length of time, and the Eastern movement of calves has been a big part of what I've done all my life.
Great, thanks, Ken. And Jason.
Yeah, Jason Danard with the Calgary Stockyards, managing partner of TEAM. TEAM is a division of the Calgary Stockyards. We are owned and operated by myself and my brother Brian and my father Don. Similar to Ken, I grew up in the business. I've been involved since the 80s, dating myself a little bit, similar to Ken. Ken made reference to rail cars coming out of the West. Well, that's what I grew up with. I grew up at the Edmonton Stockyards, and that's what we used to do is we'd load rail cars and send them east. That was a big part of the trade, for sure. It has evolved and changed a lot over the years, but I've been involved with the business for a long time. I've been general manager with TEAM Auction Sales since the early 2000s, so it's been just over 20 years. I've had the privilege of being involved with marketing over 6 million head of cattle now on our electronic platform. So it's been a good run on TEAM, and I think we're still kind of at the front end of electronic marketing. Although we as a company, the Calgary Stockyards, have been marketing cattle electronically for just about 40 years now. I still think it's an area of growth in terms of marketing. That I'm excited for the opportunity to be on the call with you today, and super excited to have Ken with us as well. Ken is, I should mention, pretty big part of what we do. We are fortunate enough to sell a lot of the premium groups of cattle in Canada on our platform. And Ken's certainly one of the buyers of those, and a very important buyer of a lot of those premium groups.
Well, thanks to both of you for joining today. We're going to talk today about marketing calves as we get into the fall run here. And I just want to start off kind of with the basics and just ask both of you, what are buyers looking for when they're buying feeder cattle?
Sure. So buying for ourselves and buying for our customers as well. The order buying side of the business probably would be 2/3 of what the calves that we actually handle in the feeder cattle out of the West. And, some of those people are filling feedlots, but, a good portion of them are people that are wanting to buy, a light stocker calf that they can winter and background and graze. And then we buy those cattle back as yearlings, or we finish them out for those customers. When we start talking with them, they're not necessarily looking for the cheapest cattle or, trying to buy me the cheapest calves. It's the word cheapest never really enters the conversation. Most of the times, a lot of these sets of calves are repeat customers. When we mention certain names, it's predictable, the genetics, the delivery, those are all things that customers are looking for. They don't want to experiment with trying to buy, new sets. Some do, but a lot of them, a lot of our customers, we've had their calves for many, many times. Good health programs. That's another thing where, it's the challenge is getting bigger every year, and that's multi-pronged challenges, from trucks to, weather. I think the bacteria that these calves have to fight off is getting tougher as well. So a good health program is important, and the understanding of what those calves have all had. And then, bigger numbers isn't necessarily a deciding factor either. We've got lots of packages of 40s and 50s and 100s that we can put together and go to some of these people. Lots of them are 100 head to 500 head customers, and packages of 40s and 50s is not uncommon to place. And the team platform and similar platforms works very well for us because we can organize trucks, dates, deliveries of those calves, and it's a nice flow of deliveries take place, and everything's fairly predictable.
I like that you mentioned reputation and repeat customers. I think reputation and kind of the consistency of a calf crop year over year that people can provide is something that maybe we take for granted some of the time. We think about, what can we prove and what facts can we put in a listing, but really that is such a foundational part of it. Jason, want to jump to you next. Anything else to add on what buyers are looking for when they're buying feeder cattle?
Well, Ken certainly touched on a lot of it. I would suggest it's a combination of a lot of different things. Genetics, obviously extremely important. Health protocol becoming more and more important as time goes on. And I think that our platform works well in both cases, in that exactly what you're buying, where it's coming from, the health protocol. These calves, these yearlings, they're worth too much money to take chances that are unnecessary when you do have options to work with operations that do have excellent health protocol in place. Delivery is certainly an important thing, both in terms of weigh up, how the cattle are sorted, time of year. I think Ken touched on that. I know this time of year when we're selling a lot of, late summer, fall delivery calves, and early delivery certainly desirable, regardless of where you are. But I think specifically in Ontario, when these cattle are traveling across the country, it's nice to get them home, settled, processed when the weather's good rather than when it's bad. Stress on the cattle. I think that is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, and that goes back to health as well. I think buying direct on a platform like Team, and there certainly are lots of them these days, more and more desirable, just in terms of getting some cattle that are predictable, that aren't going to have health issues. And I think too, if you look at our listing form on our Team sale, and it's teamauctionsales.com, anyone can go there and have a look at the listings. We try to cover basically anything of relevance to a buyer. The weight of the cattle, where the cattle are located, and I think the rep too, in terms of sourcing the cattle. People like Ken certainly have reps that they're comfortable with, that they know are describing the product for exactly as it is. The reputation of the producer certainly as or more important. The breed description, frame size, health protocol. Have the cattle had an implant? If so, what implant and when? Proper representation in terms of slide, I think really important. What type of feed program are they on? All these things are covered in our listing form. And again, this form does evolve as the industry does. And as a marketing company, we're just trying to address all of those things that folks like Ken find to be important and are important.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I appreciate you talking about the sale form that you've got there on Team and some of the different things that folks can put in, but also, that's available as a guide for what you guys are seeing that is important to buyers. So, what better tool to use to really put that information together. Want to jump back to what you mentioned there, and Ken mentioned as well, in terms of talking about the Team platform and buying direct in an online format, and talk a little bit more about what the options are out there nowadays for selling feeders and some of the pros and cons of each. So Jason, as such a big part of Team, I'll maybe start with you here and to just talk about that platform and any others that you see and the pros and cons.
Well, there's a lot of ways of doing things, for sure, in terms of procurement. The old-fashioned way, the auction market, and we do own and operate the Calgary Stockyards, and we do feel like the auction market for a lot of producers is probably the best option. So that's one way of marketing for sure. For medium or larger size producers that are able to put numbers together that will work on an electronic platform like Team, that is an option as well. Pre-sorts are an option. I think they saw and have seen a lot of success and popularity kind of through the mid 90s and up until today. I think they're losing steam a little bit. There's inherent risk with mixing the cattle. So the benefit, I guess, to a pre-sort would be that if you've got 3 calves, you can mix them with a bunch of others that are similar in size. On the buy end, you don't really know what you're getting, but on sale day, in most cases, depending on the sort of the market, they would look somewhat similar. So a bigger package may be more attractive to an order buyer that sits in the front row rather than trying to put them together 2 and 3 at a time. And a direct sale for sure. There is, for some folks that have established a relationship with a buyer like Ken, selling direct is an option. Probably the downside to that would be limited exposure. I personally like a platform, and obviously it's self-serving and saying it, but I like a platform like Team for the exposure and on the buy end as well. A platform like Team gives buyers access to cattle that they probably wouldn't have access to otherwise. So the exposure goes both ways, for sure. But I guess really the 3 primary ways of both selling and buying today would be a direct sale of the auction market or an electronic platform like Team.
And Ken, on the buyer side, what are some pros and cons for you of buying in these different ways that Jason's mentioned?
So when we're buying cattle here in Ontario, a lot of the sets of calves that come to Ontario, we buy them back as yearlings, or we'll have them contracted back off these producers. We want to make sure for sure that the verified beef program calves are going to end up at a home where they are verified beef in the program enrolled. So that's one thing we always look for. On the marketing side of it, when we buy calves in the West, all but a very small amount are done through an agent or a buyer in the West. And for example, on the Team network, we use JGL out of Moose Jaw, and they cover, they have buyers all across the West, and we feel very comfortable having them do their buying because they also have a top-notch facility in Moose Jaw, so those calves can come from different points in the West, and they arrive there, and they can even get processed or get backgrounded out west in some of the feedlots as well. We do background a fair amount of cattle some in Alberta, some in Saskatchewan, and we like doing that because not everything can move in October and November, and that is a bit of a problem for logistics. So the electronic platforms are probably 90% of the cattle we bring out of the West. There are some bigger sales in the fall that we will buy from auction markets. When there's some one owner lots, or if it is a pre-sort, if there was like 1 or 2 neighboring sets of calves get sold together. So long story short, the electronic platforms, I used to go west. My dad used to go west. We have been out west for years because everything's done through, electronically, or, our agents do the traveling. And, organizing trucks, lining trucks up, those are all things that they do for us. And, the facilities that they have and another set of eyes sure helps as well.
I want to ask a follow-up question to you both on these different platforms for selling calves. We talked about the importance of reputation for producers that are kind of just getting into the industry or maybe starting to market in a different way. Is there a good way or a better platform for them to start out with to really start building that reputation?
If I was getting into business right today, I would definitely go to an electronic platform. And, there's lots of room there for this under the description, the type of cattle that you have and, the breeding programs. I look at some of the listings, they even mention the bulls' names and the genetics that are, involved in that particular group of cattle. They can go into some pretty good detail as far as when the vaccine programs were given. When I see that in the listing, it brings confidence. I don't need to buy calves that have been off an established ranch for 3 generations. If somebody's gone out and spent the money on genetics and feeding programs and breeding programs, I'm comfortable buying those cattle.
Thanks, Ken. I think that's a good tip for those that are newer, getting into things or maybe trying something different. Jason, I want to jump to you next. And you mentioned, the sales form that team has and really filling out all those details about a listing. Once they have all that information gathered, what are some channels that producers can use to advertise the cattle that they have for sale? I know you mentioned, team in itself is kind of a way to get more exposure because folks might be going to look at one lot and they, see lots of others. But other than that, how can producers advertise?
Well, yeah, I would touch on what you said. I think by marketing on a platform like Team, you're reaching a national audience simply by consigning on the sale. I would suggest that the lion's share of the players in terms of buying feeder cattle plug into our sale every Friday, and we do sell every Friday morning. So simply by consigning, you're going to reach a very large audience and the right audience, the people that you want to reach for sure. I think in addition to that, we do a lot of social media. We post on Facebook and on Twitter every single listing that we sell on Team. And I know Ken quite often will interact with our social media posts. I think they complement, what we're already doing. I think working with VBP, I know that VBP does a pretty good job of promoting the cattle when they're going to be offered on a platform like Team. So, I think the combination of those things, what we do in addition to that at Team is we do send an email out, and I've spent over 20 years building an email list that's reaching a really highly targeted audience with thousands of subscribers, and that's promoting our upcoming sales. But also I send a recap every week, and I guess it's just trying to increase brand awareness, brand being your ranch or your farm. So the efforts that we're making, I think are certainly helping. I'd like to think that we're earning our keep in that regard. But in addition to that as well, within each listing on our site, we do have social media share tools. So producers do have the ability, and we have a lot of producers that do that are spreading the word on their cattle. We have a YouTube channel. I've personally uploaded over 13,000 videos on it, where those are the videos that play during the sale, but they're also used ahead of time. The views that we get on our videos for all of our listings on Team, it's remarkable. The reach and the tools that are available. So I would suggest as a producer, like Ken said, you use a platform. I know we're not the only platform, but a platform like Team is really going to give you reach that you would never have otherwise, and utilizing some of those social media tools, and not everyone's on the same platform, but in the cattle industry, for whatever reason, Twitter does seem to be the one that is most, including Ken, is the one that's most used. So those are some of the things that you can do and do quite easily when using a platform like Team.
Appreciate you mentioning kind of the value add that a platform like Team offers in terms of the additional advertising. And also appreciate you mentioning the VBP Plus sales listing there. I'll put a little bit of a plug in there for it. So any operations that are VBP certified that have cattle for sale can submit a listing through our sales form. It's pretty easy to put together. A lot of that information will be very much coming straight from the form that you probably filled out if you're on team. And you can send that to us and we'll send it out to our own mailing list of buyers that are VBP certified and looking for cattle from certified operations, and we'll send that out on a regular basis, especially during the fall run. I'll put the link to that form in the episode description so that it's easy for folks listening to find. I want to flip this question on its head now and go to Ken and ask, where do feedlots or buyers like you, where are you looking for information about cattle for sale? Which channels that Jason mentioned, like Twitter, where are you looking for that info?
So when I go online and I look at Team DLMS, I get talking to our buyers in the West. They'll have already looked at them as well, and they'll say that a certain set of cattle are coming up here next week, and we'll say, well, let's work on sequence whatever that number is, and get on the phone a package or two, ahead, and we'll decide what we're going to do on them. We go over the listings. We've already got cattle earmarked for this Friday's sale and others as well. So, the internet for me, going to the company's websites, looking at the listings. When it comes to YouTube, if there's nice long videos that Jason puts on there, we can have a good look at the cattle, good look at the grass, the background, some of these cattle right now, you can tell are already in some drought conditions, and pasture looks pretty light. So I have a pretty good idea what to expect with those cattle, and we can make our decisions based on that. We also like the cooperation we get with a lot of the reps. They can go to some of the ranchers or producers that have sold cattle, and would you mind keeping those cattle an extra 5-6 days or into the following week? And we find the responses are very, very good that way. It just allows us to help line trucks up, and logistics life is much easier.
It's good to hear that the marketing channels that sellers are using are matching up with what buyers are looking at. That's good news. Yeah. I want to jump back. We've talked a little bit about what the priority information that buyers are looking for about calves. And Jason, you've mentioned the team listing form. And just ask both of you, what kind of information should producers include in a listing? And maybe Jason, we'll start with you with that team form as kind of a foundation.
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, if you make reference to our listing form, it has evolved over the years, and we really try to cover anything that might be important to our important buyers like Ken. We want to know the breeding. Ken made reference to the bull power as an example. Health protocol, really important. And being on the VBP Plus program, for me, that demonstrates, if nothing else, good management practices. Things like that are important. Obviously, delivery is important. The condition of the cattle, the flesh, that's going to be a pretty good indicator of the type of performance that you can expect in the cattle. Have they been implanted? And again, if so, when and what type of implant? The feed program, and how the cattle are being weighed. So what kind of delivery are you going to get? What kind of sort are you going to get? I'm buying a group of 80 steers. Am I buying a group of 80 that are sorted out of 83? Those are obviously going to be really up and down. Or are they sorted out of 180? I'm probably going to get a pretty uniform group. So I think collectively these things are all important in terms of how they're described.
Thanks, Jason. And Ken, anything to add there on additional information to include in a listing?
Yeah, I think Jason covered a lot of it. For us, the vaccine programs, like all shots, isn't good enough anymore. And if you can say, at birth they received this, and at branding they received this, 2 weeks prior to delivery they will get this. And that's all information that we can match up our subsequent vaccine programs when they arrive here. The implant status, implants, yes, is not a good enough answer. If it's a calf hood, implant, if it's a Cinevex C or something like that, am I going to be unloading a load of calves with 10 sets of horns, or if they were dehorned, dehorned at branding, clean headed, that means a lot to us. I don't want to be doing surgeries on these cattle when they arrive here. Stress is a big thing we can eliminate. And a set of horns come off on a baby calf, mom, she licks that calf and everybody's fine. But you take a 4-inch set of horns off here in Ontario, I got the cost of doing it, the pain management, and there is a setback. So things like castration, you could put down the method, where they knife castrated or ringed at birth. That's helpful information. And if they're heifers, were they running with their brothers, or were they, what's the status as far as guaranteed open? That information helps too.
So it seems safe to say the more information, the better. Because great point, not everybody thinks the same way or has the same definition of all shots or full vaccination programs. So the more detail, the better. Absolutely.
I would expand a little bit on what Ken said, and Ken brought up a lot of good points. The yes on the implant, that doesn't really tell you a lot. It'd be nice to know when they were implanted and with what implant, and all shots. That is something that for myself, it has been a challenge forever. And unfortunately, it's kind of been the industry standard. That's just how people have described, they come through the sale ring, oh, they had all their shots. You hear stuff like this all the time. Well, with our forum, we are giving producers and our reps an opportunity to really get detailed in terms of the health protocol, and it's becoming, well, it's always been important, but we have the ability to do that today. And I would suggest that the lion's share of the cattle that we sell on team are on a very good health program. So it is an opportunity to be very detailed. What did they have at birth? Just like Ken said, what did they have at weaning? And for a lot of producers, they may even be doing all the right things, but missing that opportunity to communicate that to the other end in the listing form. So that's a bit of a work in progress, just in terms of educating not only our producers, but our reps too. A lot of our reps have been around for a very long time. They've been very successful at what they do, and all shots has worked for them for 40 or 50 years. Well, the buyer is becoming more demanding, and the value of the cattle today is so great that's not good enough anymore. And it's with the help of folks like Ken that are demanding it that we're able to pass that information on. And again, we're not jamming something down a producer's throat. A lot of times these are things that are happening anyway, and we do have an opportunity to communicate that. So we're getting better, and it will continue to do so with folks like Ken, forcing the issue as he should.
Good point there about the form being a guide on that too, and really an indication to producers of kind of what buyers are expecting nowadays. I know on our VBP sales listing form too, we've really broken out the question of herd health into which vaccines are you using and when. So it's harder to even answer that question with all shots. So it's a good indication and a good guide for where to start for producers that aren't sure how to start with that. I want to jump next into some things that we've talked about here in terms of, when we're looking at this information and all the things that we're including in the listing, what are some things producers can do to make their cattle more appealing to buyers? So what are some of those pieces of information that they can change to make their calves a little more appealing? And
Ontario's bidding on lots of cattle and always have, but I think as a buyer in Ontario, if you can make the listings, and I'm seeing a lot of it now. They're, suit load sizes to meet buyers east or west. That helps. And for us, we can't put 62,000 pounds on a trailer. We can put 58,000, especially with these lighter cattle. They need more floor space, and there's a tipping point there. And being able to have the flexibility to take a few less cattle, because we're gonna go farther distances than what going to southern Alberta would be, for instance. Having a little flexibility with that helps. I think the number one thing though is the vaccine programs, and I don't want to keep beating the vaccines, but if you had the flexibility in there to say, these calves can be boosted 2 weeks prior, that builds up a lot of immunity. I'd probably buy 20 sets of cattle that are boosted 2 weeks prior to delivery. And at Christmas we go through the list of all the cattle that we bought, placed, and last fall on over 20,000 calves. At Christmas time, we could count the deads in both hands, which I tell people that in the West, and it's a hard number to get around, to think that you hardly have any deads on these cattle, and troubles. But it's the management of those cattle and the management of the feeders and the movement, the trucks. For us, being able to get these cattle as good as they are and have them start as good as they can, just going that extra mile with the vaccine programs really helps. And those are the calves that we search out. We do take the odd horn off, and we do clean the odd castration up, but it's nothing like what we experienced 10 or 12 years ago. So having those little details done, I think a buyer gets well paid for it. In this day and age, it's not hard to put an extra $4 or $5, $100 on the bids. And on a 6-weight calf, that translates to $25 to $30 a head pretty quick if everything's done right. I'm pretty sure on 100 calves, I could do that kind of work for $4,000 to $6,000 a load more.
Great points about those little extra details, the extra things that you can do before they go to the feedlot. Just takes that extra work, extra labor and time off their end for sure. Jason, anything to add there on what producers can do to make their calves more appealing to buyers?
Well, Ken's touched on a lot of very good points. I think delivery is one that Ken also touched on earlier. Don't deliver them in the last week of October, the first week in November, period, ever. It's just a bad idea. Every year we know, like clockwork, that is going to be a bad delivery period. The weather starts to turn, you can't get trucks, the auction markets are overwhelmed, the feedlots are overwhelmed processing. It's a gong show, and it will be every single year. It has been my entire career, and probably Ken's as well. So avoid those periods, especially if you're marketing on an electronic platform like Team. And if you are going to deliver into those periods, which for some people just makes sense for production reasons, get them priced well ahead of that period. Don't try to sell them in that period, because we know every year the market will be depressed during that time for the reasons that I've just expressed. So avoid those periods if you can. Have some flexibility in terms of delivery. If you just have no other option, which is sometimes the case, then at least get them priced ahead of time so that buyers like Ken can get trucks set up in advance of delivery of the cattle, because we know that trucks will be an issue every single year during that time period. I guess in addition to that, for producers that can't quite put full load lots together, which represents, by the way, the lion's share of the industry in terms of the operations, you can still utilize a platform like Team, but do it during a period where we're not seeing heavy volume on the sales, because I think you'll get lost in the shuffle when that happens. So what are those periods? We know on the calves from kind of mid-August to mid-September, we're going to have massive sales, and it's not just us, it's everyone. More and more folks are forward pricing cattle. They're doing it on electronic platforms. And in a sale where, we, as an example, have 14,000 head of cattle on, those smaller groups will have a tendency to not attract the same kind of attention. And we do sell a lot of smaller groups in those sales, and they do trade well, but I think you're going to have better success by doing it in a time period where there aren't so many cattle on offer. An excellent marketing period historically, early January, maybe the best market year after year. It's a great marketing period, but nobody's doing anything. And on a platform like Team, it doesn't matter that trade is light, because we're still going to get the industry plug in on Friday. why not market them in early January? Quite often we're on a 2 or 3 week layoff where folks want to get back to work again. If I'm buying cattle from an order buyer from a feedlot, I'm kind of itching to get doing something again. So that those periods have a tendency to be very good periods in terms of marketing. I know I do that myself. Um, I'll buy all my cattle during that period that I just suggested you avoid as a cattle feeder, because I know the thing's going to get hammered every year, and I'm going to buy cattle $30-40 under what's happening today because of that. But in terms of marketing, I'm going to hit those periods where marketings are a little bit lighter, and your cattle are going to get a little bit more attention than they would otherwise. So those would be a couple.
And I appreciate you calling out some examples of, if you don't have the ideal situation, if you have a smaller group, or, you need to market during that delivery time, tips on how to make that work. Because I know sometimes we'll have producers listening going, okay, well, this tip doesn't work for me. So how do I get around it? So appreciate you calling out those different scenarios and how to make them work too.
There's a few other things out there too that I kind of wonder, and no disrespect, but I see a lot of calves going on, on a hopper feeder or full feed of pellets or full feed of oats, 5-6 weeks ahead of time. Some of our biggest challenges last year were some of these soggy calves coming off truck. The trailers smelt. Even the feed and water station, commented on, why do these cattle smell so bad? Well, it's the amount of oats they had in them, and I don't know. For us, you want to feed your calves something. I like them, a bunk line broke. Feed some insilage type bales, some supplement, some high level of vitamins. Have them water bowl broke. Those are the kind of things you can do at the feedlot, or take those calves and put them into a feedlot, and they know what a water bowl is. So those are the little things that that can make starting calves successful. I've got 2 sets of calves, and they're large groups, but every year they have the set up so that those cattle can come into they have some tires turned inside out. They put some roughage in it with a mixer wagon. They open the gate, the calves all come in. They know what roughage is. There's water bowls in there. They're in a high level of vitamins. And at weaning day, they put the feed in, they open the gates, they close the gate, they take the cows away, and they load the trucks. It's a very simple program. The one set in particular, in the last 4 years, I haven't touched a calf when they've come to Ontario. So things like that work.
I think that all points to building reputation as well, which is, as you've mentioned, a huge part of what you're looking for. And so even if it's not like a direct premium year after year, it's bringing buyers back to say, hey, we had no issues with those calves. Those are the ones we want to keep going back and looking for.
Yeah, 100%.
I want to jump next to, we've talked about listing the calves and all the things that producers can do here to kind of set themselves up for success in how they're advertising and getting up to the sale. But once those calves are listed and they're sold or they're selling, what can producers do to follow up and ensure that they have a successful sale? Whether that's in person, are they going to the auction mart, or if it's an online sale, how can they keep following up?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and we do have a lot of producers that want to follow up. Well, first of all, thank the buyer, but also find out how the cattle are doing. So, either working through your rep or contacting the end buyer directly. I think it's just good follow up. I don't think that just applies to our business. I think that applies to any business. Is your customer happy? And if not, why? Or what can we do better? You're happy, but is there room for improvement? I think that's just good follow-up regardless of the business that you're in, and certainly applies to ours. So whether it be through your rep, which is probably going to be the easiest channel, your rep will likely have access to the end buyer, and the end buyer probably doesn't have time to have contact with all of those people, but can make time for Jason Danard or whoever happens to be repping the cattle, because that would represent a much greater number. And I think probably the more likely way to access the end buyer would be through your rep. So follow up and do it through your rep, I think would be the most likely way to do it.
Great advice. Yeah, I come from kind of the seed stock side of the industry, and we talk a lot about kind of customer service there and follow up. And I think the same thing totally has to apply to selling feeders. You don't know what your reputation is like if you don't follow up, and you don't know how that might be affecting your marketing. So, why wouldn't you reach out and try to figure out how to improve that to improve sales in the future?
One other thing that I would say in addition to what I've already said, we do get feedback from the end buyer, and I wouldn't ever disregard it, because cattle feeders, order buyers, we all talk amongst ourselves, and if you're getting feedback, address it. Don't ignore it, and especially if it's something that can be changed at your end. So if you do get feedback, I would pay attention to it. I would take it pretty seriously, and quite often it can be untrue as well. The end buyer might have your cattle mixed up with somebody else's. So I think it's important when you hear and when you get some feedback on your cattle that you follow up on it. Don't leave it sit. Don't make any assumptions, because I think if there's a fire, you want to put it out. And if there's something that can be improved upon, I think in most cases you'd probably be well served to do it.
Yeah, I would say, for the producers that are selling their calves in the live auction, and there's lots that are still going to go that way, and we support that as 100%. But when the calves are coming in the ring and they'll say the ranch name, and that's about all you hear. But there's ample time to say that's so and so ranch. Calves are arrived here last night, 85-mile haul. They've had this, and this for vaccines. At 2 weeks prior to shipping, they were on this, and they're on a silage-based diet. And a little more description, like tell me that take a look at these cattle, boys, and go ahead and buy them. Well, what am I buying? Our buyers are on the phone all the time, and when we hear that, if we're gonna spend some money that day, it'll be on cattle that have we feel confident in what we're buying, because it's been announced, and a little piece of paper with all that stuff on, that goes a long way, I think.
I want to stick on the in-person auction there for a second. And I've heard a lot, of the value of, if you're selling cattle in person, go to the sale, watch in person. Buyers will ask you questions. You're going to sell better if you're actually there. And maybe the digital equivalent of that is, have your phone number available for questions or anything like that. And I'm curious on your guys' thoughts on the value of that, and if that affects, how a sale will go for somebody.
Well, I would say at the live auction, we do own and operate the Calgary Stockyard, so we do a lot of we sell a lot of cattle through the ring as well. I think that you should be there every single time. If you're selling yearlings or calves, you're selling even your cull cows, I think you should be there when the cattle are selling. I think it's too important a day to not be there. What could be more important at that moment in time than being there to watch the sale of your cattle? And sometimes somebody might have a question about the cattle, and if you're not there to answer that question, assumptions will be made, and quite often an assumption that does not work in your favor. So I think Ken touched on a lot of really good points. Tell us about the cattle. When did they get in? There's so many little pieces of information that can be communicated. So I think that's important. And you're right, there's always some time in there for the auctioneer. I know when I have customers coming in at the Calgary Stockyards, I give our auctioneer a little cheat sheet for each of the producers. This is what the cattle are. This is the health program. These are the bulls that he uses. This is when the cattle came, all these little things that are important to Ken or anyone else buying the cattle. And those things, of course, can be covered more easily on an electronic platform like Team, but at the auction market as well. Those details are really important, and they should be communicated.
Jumping next, into post-sale. So if a producer isn't getting the results that they want in the sale ring. We've touched on this a little bit in terms of reaching out to your rep, but where can they get feedback on what they could improve on?
Well, I think for sure working with your rep, in a lot of cases, probably in most cases, they're probably going to have suggestions for you in terms of what you could do to improve. Our list of agents, as an example, we've got about 50 agents across the country that are all full-time cattle marketers. They're in the business of marketing cattle, and they know what folks like Ken respond to or should. And so that's a very good resource in terms of wanting to know how to improve. I think also pay attention to what type of response the world is having to your cattle versus somebody else's. Why are these cattle selling so much higher than mine, or why are mine outselling these? I think that more so today than ever, the buyers are really grading the cattle. So the spread between the top cattle and the bottom cattle is greater than it's ever been. And the spread, quite frankly, is probably where it should be now. I've felt for years that the medium and plain cattle have traded way too tight to the good cattle. And any cattle feeder can tell you that you're better off to spend money on the good ones. And I'm sure that Ken would agree with me on that. A good resource, your rep for sure. And also, if you have any sort of contact or means of communicating with the cattle feeder, the one who ends up feeding the cattle, these are really good resources. And again, compare, pay attention, watch a team sale, watch every team sale. We sell a couple hours every Friday. We do it from the comfort of home or office. And I think just if you're paying attention, you'll see what the market is responding to, and you'll see the groups that are getting the best response. And I think in most cases, it'll be pretty obvious what the world is responding to. So that's also a very good resource, just watching what's happening for sure. And it's free to do so, and you can do it from the comfort of home or office.
Great point. There's a lot of data out there now with these digital platforms, and that we can watch right from home and, analyze a little deeper than a market report. So I think that's something I hadn't thought of, that, that's really a resource in itself, a feedback cycle. Ken, you want to comment on, how you might give feedback to the folks that you're buying calves from, or what a way that they could get that feedback could be?
Yesterday in Katy, we bought some cattle, and there was a package of 50 steers we bought, and the producer was there, and he came up to us and said, I appreciate you buying my cattle. Any questions? Go ahead and, ask, or here's my phone number if you want. I really appreciate you buying my cattle, and, wish you all the best with them. I sold them to a customer, but that in-person connection, I've got his number. I'm not going to try to buy him around, a sale either. I feel confident that if I were to call him up and say, like, they found 5 CCI tags missing, or they found, a bull in them or something like that, I'm sure that would be taken as constructive criticism. I don't complain after we buy them, but if a guy asks me, if you have any questions, don't be afraid to call. To me, that just builds some credibility with the producer. I guess, if you were sitting there and you got your receipts at home and you saw what your calves brought, if you're happy, that's one thing. But if not, I guess in either case, you could ask yourself, did I take too much out of these cattle, or did I leave something on the table? And I sometimes think that people think having them go out 20 pounds heavier, they're gaining something, but sometimes that 20 pounds extra puts them out of that weight range. If I'm buying a 5-weight calf for a back running program to go to grass in November, and the calves come in at 6 1/4 into the ring or get offered, sometimes those 575s bring more money than a 6 1/4 weight that's been fed a bunch of feed or warmed up too much. And then, I would also ask myself, would I have wanted to buy these cattle, or if there's something in there that I probably could have done to help out, if I was buying them, taking them home, would I want to see this arrive at my yard? And, with a lot of these places, I get connected through some of the reps, some of the team reps in particular. I have so and so. You bought his calves. He was wondering if he could reach out to you around Christmas time and see how things went. And I'm not that busy in that time of year, and I would encourage anyone to call me if we've ended up with their cattle, and we can have a good discussion. Most times it's let me know when you're going to sell them again. And I've had a couple producers just this past week, reach out through Twitter or reach out on calling in the office here, letting us know that their calves are coming. So, I wouldn't try to buy those cattle if I didn't feel confident that the guy's willing to stand behind and put his ranch, family's ranch name on them, his or her for that matter.
Thanks, Ken. Great tips. I just want to finish off by asking both of you if you have any last words of advice for producers on this topic.
Well, we've covered a lot in this call, and I think collectively there's a lot of good stuff in there. There's a lot of really good points that we've touched on. I think in terms of marketing, for advice, one thing we didn't touch on, and it is something that is an advantage of an electronic platform as opposed to selling live through a ring, is the advantage of taking advantage of a strong market in July. As an example, we sold this year, we sold a lot of calves in July, and they're not for delivery until October, November for the most part, some in September. But as a producer, you had the ability to price your calves in July and not have to worry about it. So that is one advantage of an electronic platform like Teams. You do have the advantage of being able to price your cattle ahead of time, and those calves that were priced in July are probably going to end up being the highest priced calves this year. That's not always the case, but in a lot of years, most years in my life anyway, the cattle that are priced earliest are the cattle that are priced highest. So, having the ability to take advantage of a platform like Team to do that. And in some cases, insurance is an option as well. And particular for those folks in the West, I think that insurance is something that producers should always consider just to cover yourself on the downside. But having the ability to price well in advance and do it at any moment in time, really. I mean, we sell any given Friday, so you can price them in March, April, May, June. One policy we do have is that we can't price something that doesn't exist. So the calves have to be on the ground before we can price them. But from that point forward, you have the ability to do it. So that's one thing that we didn't really touch on in the call. And in terms of taking advantage of programs like VBP as an example, if you feel like enrolling and qualifying may be of benefit to you, and I'm going to suggest that it is a benefit for me personally with a program like VBP. It demonstrates, if nothing else, good management practices. And we do some VBP featured sales, and we do see the VBP Plus certified operations sell their cattle at a premium. So there is a cost, money and time in terms of getting involved with the program, but there is a benefit as well. So take advantage of those programs, and not just the VBP program. There's lots of programs out there, and a lot of them are working. So explore them, consider them at a minimum, and they potentially could work for you.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate those last thoughts. And Ken, any last words of advice for producers?
Yep. So, I'm pretty sure it's safe to say the demand for cattle is not going to go away anytime soon. And buyers need as many things going right for them when they have a couple loads of calves that are costing $250,000 a load. So doing those little extra things, even good stockmanship, I think it's becoming a lost art. And I find that these calves that are easy to handle and well presented, they just are a pleasure to work with. Like Jason said, we've covered a lot, but in the last 3 years with the drought conditions and the challenges that, between COVID pricing on cattle, drought, hauling, feed. I talked to lots of ranchers, and people have they've downsized because of drought. The perseverance that I've seen coming from the cow calf producers families has been amazing. And to be quite honest with you, I wish them all the best. It's their turn to be able to make some money, and long time coming too. We're there to buy as many good cattle as we can, and I just want to give a lot of credit to the people that have stuck with it and stayed in the business, because the last 3-4 years has been a real challenge for them, and we appreciate buying the good top sets of cattle out of the Western Ontario, and hopefully we can keep doing it for a long time.
Thanks, Ken. As a cow-calf producer, I sure appreciate that. It's nice to see, the market going that way, and appreciate you commenting on that too. I just want to thank you both so much for joining today. I agree, we covered a whole lot, and I think there's really a lot of great tips in here for producers, and so I really appreciate both your time in joining. That's it for this episode of the Simply Verified Beef podcast. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram to follow along for new episodes as they come along.